Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lecture 6 for History 2013, United States History to 1865. This week, we're going to be talking about America's War for Independence. So, we're actually going to look at the Revolutionary War and the course of war during this time. Approximately, we're going to be studying the years 1775 to 1783. Let's go ahead and get into it today. We have three sections: Law and Order, not SVU, Early Years of War, and Identity. I'll start off with Law and Order. So, just as a refresher from the end of last week, we have the intolerable acts that come as a result back and forth of actions that the government is taking, and then the colonists feeling that they're pushed into this reaction. They have no other choice but to make their wishes known this way, which results in our First Continental Congress from last week or last lecture. When we left off on the last lecture, they had sent off their notice and their petitions to the British government, and now we're waiting to see what the response was. Well, the British response was not great. In response, they dispatched General Thomas Gage, here, this is his picture, to Boston in May 1774. They then he became the royal governor of Massachusetts and the leader of the British military there. And for the second time, the British again occupied the town. So they, came back and they just kind of dismiss any of the colonists' problems and just immediately go back to their same old tactics. And the British Army began to prepare for conflict, and they started to turn their attention towards supplies of weapons and gunpowder. And so he's going to station 3,500 troops in Boston and begin periodic raids on towns where guns and gunpowder were stockpiled throughout the area. And Boston is going to become the headquarters of the British military operations. And so, because of that, many of the citizens in Boston are going to flee the city and go live somewhere else during this time. The colonial response to that is that the Massachusetts delegates, they're going to meet in a Congress and publish the Suffolk Resolves, which is officially going to reject the coercive acts, which was that putting Thomas Gage in charge, garrisoning those troops, starting that stockpile. They're going to reject everything that Britain had done so far. They're also going to say we need to raise our own colonial militias to take military action against the British. And it's going to really show that how dissatisfied the colonists are with the royal government, and specifically the royal government in Massachusetts. They are going to begin stockpiling guns and ammunition. So Thomas Gage is not wrong with wanting to kind of get ahead of that, because the colonists are also going to be doing that and being prepared for a violent response. He's actually going to push them over the edge, though. He's actually going to be the thing that forces them and kind of convinces them to create local rebel militias that can mobilize in a minute's time, called the Minutemen. Many of these men are going to be veterans of the French and Indian War. Remember, we talked about that had a huge colonial presence on the British side there. They're going to have leftover garments and leftover drills, skills from that they're going to carry over into this war. General Gage is going to seize munitions, so weapons, supplies, all of that, from Cambridge and Charlestown in Massachusetts. But when he tries to do the same in Salem, his troops are going to encounter a large crowd of Minutemen and have to turn around and leave empty-handed. In New Hampshire, the Minutemen there are going to take over Fort William and Mary and confiscate weapons and cannons there from the British. So immediately we have this back and forth, small scale between the British and the colonies. What's going to kick us off, though, is Lexington and Concord, the shot heard around the world. On April 18th, 1775, hundreds of British troops are going to march from Boston down here. And they're going to go straight to Concord first. That's the plan. But they're going to be stopped at Lexington by Minutemen, and then they're going to be stopped again in Concord. And they're going to have really intense fire, and that's going to be the first official huge firefight between the British and the colonists. Let's start off, really lock us into that path to war. In response, we're also going to get common sense from Thomas Paine, and he's basically going to be like, hey, we have no other choice. It's common sense for us to do this. In order to get the same rights and privileges as Englishmen, That's what we want. We want to be treated equally, but King and Parliament are refusing. So Thomas Paine's going to publish his pamphlet of common sense, and he's going to use really plain language that makes it accessible to all people. So even if you could not read yourself, if somebody read it to you, you could understand what it was saying and get the idea of, hey, we do need to rebel. It's common sense that we have to take this action against the British. He's also going to call for the colonies to separate from England and become their own internal union, right, an independent republic. Common sense said that part. After that, we're going to get the Declaration of Independence. It'll be signed July 4th, 1776. So once Lexington and Concord meet, once the First Continental Congress sends off their thing, things are going to be moving really, really quickly until we get to 2 years after the First Continental Congress and the Coercive the Intolerable Acts, and now we're at war. There's no turning back, right? It's going to be signed from delegates from all 13 colonies, which is different from that first pamphlet that we sent over. Remember, Georgia was not present for that. Georgia is present for here, all 13 colonies. We're going to have a repeat of some of that same language that we first sent, and it's going to say that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among the rights, are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it'll go on further to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, right? That the main aim of government is to ensure these rights for all of its citizens, and that England is not ensuring these rights for the colonists. So the colonists are within their own rights to get rid of England and to start their own country. It includes grievances specifically against King George III, and that's to win support from other European countries. They're saying, hey, this guy that you don't like, we also don't like because he's doing all these things against us. So then we go to war, right? We're officially away from war. I'm not going to read this full infographic, but the war goes on from 1775 until 1783. So it's a very long war. It goes back and forth. The textbook details a lot of the battles and a lot of more of the strategy. And there are several videos online if you'd like to watch that. But what we're really concerned of is the colonial perspective of this war. They feel they're fully within their rights, that they are waging this righteous revolution against England. But something to remember is that while revolutions and rebellions have happened for years, this one is unique because it's a colony against its country, and it's not to join another country, right? It's not the colonists fighting against England so that they can join France. It's the colonists fighting against England so that they can become their own nation, which is something very unique for this time, something that had never been done before. And when we think about, this is another map of the battles. When we think about colonial perspective, we want to think about the identity. What's going on with the people who are fighting this war, who are living through this war? Well, there are 6 identities that we can kind of talk about today. That's the Loyalists, the Patriots, the Native Americans, the enslaved people, the free people of color, and women. So when we think about Loyalists, we don't think about them, right? Or we think about them as being the enemy, the bad guy, right? They're siding with England. About 1/3 of the British American population, so about 1/3 of the people living in the colonies, are loyal. They remain loyal to the British Empire throughout the entirety of the Revolutionary War. They're most often royal officials, so the people who work for England, but there are also merchants and business people with ties to Britain, and they're worried about this revolution, and they're worried about this talk of a new nation, and they can't guarantee that their livelihood and their businesses will survive this. So they hedge their bets with England, right? The people who they can expect from, right? They are going to view the rebels as hypocrites and schemers. They're going to say, "You guys are just trying to do this for the attention. You don't have good intentions behind it. You are not. Who are you? You're farmers. How are you going to lead a country, right?" And some loyalists are truly thinking that the rebels are going to lose, and they are then even more worried about what Britain is going to do to them. Remember, Britain had already closed the Boston port, right? What more would they do that would then hurt these merchants and these people who are just trying to make their living here? On the flip side, you've got the Patriots, right? They're the loudest faction of British Americans, and we're supremely inspired by common sense. And they're the ones who push for the Continental Congresses and push for the Declaration of Independence. They are also merchants, but not necessarily ones with a lot of ties to England. But primarily, they are farmers, shoemakers, sailors, regular everyday people. They face major difficulties during the war, including shortages of all supplies, clothing, and food, right? They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the things that England, a standing army, has. They're also going to fall into financial difficulties. They don't have enough to support themselves, let alone a full army and a full war. Looking at Native Americans exist throughout all of these conflicts that we've talked about, even obviously the French and Indian War. In the Revolutionary War, though, they're kind of divided between the Patriots and the Loyalists, or Patriots in England, and it has a lot to do with that particular society or that particular culture's previous interactions and prior loyalties. Were they loyal to France? Were they loyal to England and then betrayed by England? Did they have bad experiences with the colonists? You know, it really depended case by case, society by society. Tribes such as the Mohawk and the Creek are going to remain loyal to the British Empire and work as spies and aides to them. But other tribes are going to work with the Patriots against the British, either because they like the Patriots, the colonists, or they just wanted to get rid of the British, right? And then you have still other tribes that are just going to remain neutral, and other tribes that are going to hurt both sides, spread misinformation. And individual Native Americans, no matter what tribe, also worked as spies for both sides, for the colonists and for the British. Looking at the role of the enslaved people, they also are going to be able to fight for both the British and the Patriots. On the British side, they are freeing any slaves who fought for them as a reward for fighting, while the Patriots did this on a case-by-case basis. So Britain is putting out a call to any enslaved person, and they're saying, "Hey, if you sign up for the British Army, or your master's a loyalist and he sends you to fight for us, you're free at the end of this war. No questions, you're free." The Patriots are also going to allow enslaved people to fight with them or to work with their armies. But the case of freeing the slaves is going to happen case by case, individual by individual, and often master by master. It won't be a full set rule like Britain will. Enslaved people are not allowed to fight in the Continental Army, but they can act as laborers, cooks, spies. Between 10,000 and 20,000 enslaved people got their freedom through the war, either by running away successfully or by fighting for that British Army and getting freedom at the end of it. On the flip side, you also have free people of color who are able to fight in the Continental Army. They are able to enlist and fight, but they're required to serve in all Black squadrons under the command of a white leader. And that's something that we'll see again and again. The Civil War, the World War I, World War II, we'll see that very far into modern times, that this is the setup that free people of color, that Black Americans, are required to work under. They're also going to face much discrimination, and they're not going to be recognized in the same manner as white soldiers. That means they're not going to get the same commendations, the same promotions, the same medals. And then finally, women. Women is going to increase exponentially the workload for women. And it's really going to place them into a domestic sphere. Now, not only do they have to worry about feeding and washing and cleaning and healing their own husband and kids, they also have to worry about any soldier that might come up onto their doorstep. They're also going to be producing the supplies for the war. We don't have factories at this point, and we don't have an institution like the British Army does in order to widely manufacture. So a lot of the supplies and food are going to be created in-house by women working for the war effort. And they have to do this while also keeping their households running. Women are also expected to act as nurses for wounded soldiers. So they didn't necessarily follow the army around, but if a wounded soldier was brought to you, you were expected to take care of him and heal him. And so that puts a lot of burden onto women in this war as well. So that's a quick run through of our 6 identities that we identified for the American Revolution. That will also bring us to the end of lecture 6. Um, Again, if you want more details of the strategy or the battle, go ahead and read that textbook reading for this week, which you also should be doing anyway. And that'll have a lot more. I particularly don't like to get bogged down into the details of strategy and things like that when discussing war, but it's there for you if you like it. If you need recommendations on videos or anything else, supplemental material that you're interested in for anything that you read today or talked about today, let me know and I'll find that for you. As always, if you have any questions or you want to see anything up close, just post something in the questions forum or send me an email. Otherwise, that's the end of lecture 6 here, and I'll see you guys back for lecture 7.